Hey everybody, Coach Toolshed here. Today I want to discuss Days Gone and the reviews surrounding that game, and I want to open that up into a broader conversation discussing gaming reviews in general and the issues that we see with the hive mindset that goes into reviewing games and the conversations that ensue after the reviews come out. Now, as many of you are probably aware, Days Gone is a PS4 exclusive that came out last Friday. The reviews for it went out on Thursday, and for the most part, many of them were middle of the road. The game currently sits at a 72 on Metacritic, and that is precisely what I want to discuss today, because when you look at a Metacritic score and you see something in 72, well, that does not really give off the impression that it's a great game, even though if you go by Metacritic's own guidelines, that should be a good game if it's over a 70, and you sometimes hear people trying to defend that score, even though I think most people know that Metacritic really only goes from 50 to 100. Most games do not score anywhere below 5. The reviewers do not use 1 through 5 on the scale for the most part. Every once in a while you come across a true dud like Fallout 76 where reviewers will go lower than a 5, and of course that Metacritic score on that game was brutal, the worst AAA launch of the entire generation, but that is extremely rare. Generally speaking, even for games that are very poorly reviewed, it's still guaranteed to be above a 5. Even Crackdown 3, a game that was widely panned by critics and audiences alike, still sits in the high 50s for a review score. Now, when it comes to Days Gone, what you're going to see is even though critics widely gave this middling reviews, if you go into any comment section on any YouTube video discussing Days Gone, what you'll see is a lot of comments expressing incredulity discussing the review scores, and they can't believe why there's so many outlets that gave this game such low review scores. Now, while the aggregate sits at a 72, if you actually click on the site, you'll see many review sites gave it scores in the low 60s. There's a few that gave it pretty high scores, and some that gave it really abysmal scores like a 30 or a 40. But for the most part, most of the scores sit in the mid 60s as a game that is relatively average. But if you look in the comments, people are overwhelmingly positive about the game in ways that you don't normally see. I see pretty much massive consensus about this game in the comment sections across the board. You will see a few people dissenting. You'll see, of course, some hardcore Xbox fans gloating over the fact that finally Sony is getting its comeuppance and getting the reviews that their games truly deserve. I've seen that being floated about here and there. But for the most part, most people seem to be enjoying the game, and as someone who's put in the better part of the weekend playing the game, I actually have to say that I've been rather pleasantly surprised. Looking at the gameplay of this game in previews, I thought that this was going to be, much like the critics said, pretty average game, because this is a game that if you break down everything, if you are doing a review of this game, there are several things about this game that really aren't very innovative. This doesn't really do anything new, but at the same time, it doesn't really do too much really bad. There's some audio bugs, sure, and I've been hit with that multiple times. You have to restart the game entirely. It's a huge nuisance, and they haven't fixed it yet. There's also been a lot of bugs in the review copy of the game, which has been largely patched out. They're already on version 1.05 of the game, so they've already pushed out quite a few updates, and they're still working on it. They are currently trying to address the audio bug, which seems to be very widespread. And other than that, what I've seen is people are engaged in the game. And I didn't really necessarily enjoy the game myself for the first few hours. It's largely on rails for the first few hours, and I was noticing, I was saying to myself, okay, I can see this getting repetitive very quickly, but the more I play, the more I'm actually getting into the game and enjoying the systems of the game, because while I've seen it compared to games like The Last of Us or Far Cry, it really doesn't feel like either of those games in any way, shape, or form. The game that I would most closely compare it to is State of Decay 2, actually, which is another game, which I've mentioned in a previous video that I actually enjoyed, but got pretty bad reviews across the board. I believe the review score for that game is in the low 60s. So I feel like this is more of a State of Decay 2 type game with obviously much more polish and a much better graphical situation. And there is no base building aspect of this game, but other than that, you're largely doing the same type of activities. You're going around in a post-apocalyptic world filled with zombies, even though, of course, I'm obligated to mention that they're not called zombies in the game. They're called freakers. Everyone has to put that in their video, so I'm going to put that in too. Follow the trend, right? That's how you do it on YouTube, right? Follow the trend. But you largely are just going around the map, trying to find fuel to keep your vehicle running, trying to find scrap parts to repair your vehicle. You're crafting Molotovs to burn out zombie nests. You're hitting a lot of things in the face with baseball bats, and you're trying to conserve ammo for when you really need it to get out of Dodge quickly if you start getting chased by a group of zombies that you can't really handle. So in many ways, the minute-to-minute gameplay, I would say, much more closely resembles State of Decay 2 than anything in The Last of Us or the Far Cry games. I understand, for some reason, much like if a game is too difficult, people have to compare it to Dark Souls, apparently any open-world game where there's bandit hideouts has to be compared to Far Cry as well. This game does not really feel like Far Cry in any way, shape, or form. I will just put that out there. Sure, it does a lot of things that Ubisoft games do and get away with for the most part, but it doesn't really play or feel like a typical Ubisoft game. I would say this game has a lot more personality than a lot of those games, and of course when it comes to Ubisoft games, reviewers have no problem giving those games 8s and 9s, even though Ubisoft hasn't changed their formula in years. But apparently when Days Gone does some similar aspects to those games, apparently that's a problem because it's not innovative. It's not innovative. Can I make a suggestion to reviewers? And this goes for myself too, because I have sometimes been guilty of this. But when discussing a game, can we try to understand that most people that you are reviewing the games for, on average, don't sit there and play every single game. So while it might seem mind-numbing to you to play another open world game, and you might feel like you've done it all before, for people who only purchase a couple games a year, this could be a perfectly fine game that they could have dozens and dozens of hours of fun playing, especially if they enjoy stealth type games, because this is by and large a stealth game. If you like being stealthy and going around and taking out enemies and going through a map and doing a bunch of missions and stuff like that, this is a perfectly fine game. Sure, it's not perfect. Is it God of War? No. Is it Red Dead Redemption 2? No. I'm not saying it is. But is this game abysmally bad, or is this game worthy of getting below average scores? No, it's certainly not. Certainly not. And while you can tell that the game has been in production for a very long time, because some of the gameplay mechanics feel very dated, and it also utilizes the PS4 touchpad for controlling the menu. You swipe left, swipe right, swipe up and down. Stuff you haven't really seen too much in any PS4 games aside from some launch title games such as Killzone Shadowfall utilized the touchpad in that way. So you can tell that this is a game that has been in development for a very, very long time, maybe in a bygone era. You can also tell from the story that they are directly ripping off sort of a combo of The Walking Dead and Sons of Anarchy, which the developers themselves have admitted. That is their inspiration for the game. Once again, series that were far more popular earlier in the decade. But despite all that, what do we play games for? Do we play games to have fun and enjoy them? Because at the end of the day, I'm actually having fun and enjoying this game. And when I woke up to go to work this morning, the first thought that popped in my head was like, I kind of want to play some more Days Gone and get a little bit further into the game world. Which is interesting, because the game world, while it looks good, isn't necessarily all that intriguing. There's some cool locations, but there's no interesting loot to find. The only stuff you're going to find out in your journey is crafting materials for the most part, and maybe some low-level weapons. You're not going to find any big prize hiding anywhere. There's some upgrade materials for your character that you can find at certain designated locations, but going through a small town, going through every building, you're not going to find a bunch of crazy loot. That's not what the game's about. The game is about surviving and getting from point A to point B, doing missions for people. It's a simple premise in a game that really doesn't do anything new, but it's a fun game to play. And I think a lot of reviewers sometimes forget that just because they're trying to blast through their third open world game this month, a lot of people, this might be the only open world game that they play the entire year. And for people like that, this is a game that I might suggest them picking up if the title intrigues them. Because like I said, I'm having fun playing it, and the overwhelming conversation seems to be, positive towards the game, aside from the mainstream critics. Now, let's get into the issue with Metacritic, the real issue as I see it, because I know a lot of people bemoan the website, but I have more of a meta issue with Metacritic. And that is, so often when we discuss games, they all come down to, well, what's the Metacritic score? What's the Metacritic score? And when you go back in the past and you're trying to compare games from years gone by, everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people go back and try to lean on the Metacritic score. My problem with that is, if you look at any given Metacritic review, you'll see that next to the review score, they'll tell you how many critics have reviewed that game, how many scores that aggregate is based off. And what you'll see almost every time is that number is going to be under 100 people. For a popular game, sometimes it'll push over 100, but for the most part, it's between 25 to 70 reviews that they're going to go by. And for the most part, all of these people are people who are friendly with each other, people who are either connected to a network, maybe they work together, maybe they have different websites operating in Europe and the US, there may be sister sites, people who talk together in Southern California and get their hive mind consensus going before they put out their review scores. And that's why so many of these reviews sound the exact same. People don't pick up any nuance. All of these corporate websites, you are going to read basically the exact same thing over and over again. They're going to talk about how things are repetitive. They're going to bemoan the fact that it's a white male protagonist and presumably dock a point or two off the game just because of that for some reason, because that's an issue. You're going to get reviewers who get really mad if a game isn't political enough for them. Or they might get mad if the game pushes politics that they don't necessarily agree with, or if it uses language that they don't agree with. You just saw last week the big hubbub about a imagined word that someone thought they heard, and they got all offended and wrote an entire article about it, because that's the culture we're in. And these review sites that give out review scores that don't reflect what the general public feels like, I feel this is growing more and more every day. Because what we have here in Days Gone, there's obviously a huge disconnect between the mainstream reviewers and the average fans. Because like I said earlier in the video, if you go to any comment section talking about this game, the fans seem to really be enjoying it. Me personally, this is not really meant to be an impressions video. I haven't really talked too much about the game itself. Me personally, though, I'm enjoying it as well. And I had no hopes for this game. I thought that this game was going to be completely mediocre and that I was going to be bored to tears. And for the first few hours, I wasn't loving it. I wouldn't necessarily say I'm loving it right now either, but I am liking it. And I still want to keep playing it. And this could be the most critical thing about it. This could be one of the most important aspects of it, is that I kind of wish that this game gets a sequel down the line, and maybe they can improve on some of the systems of the game, maybe update it, make it a little bit more streamlined and more suited towards modern gaming, because there is still some bygone problems from, I don't know, about 5 years ago that this game still is trucking along with. But anyway, that's it from me, Coach Toolshed. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Please subscribe if you want to stay in tune with the channel headed forward, and as always, keep it turned to 11.